Coogs House. The Houston Cougars face a somewhat familiar foe again this weekend, but wait till you hear what they're calling themselves.
You are Locked On Cougs, your daily podcast on the Houston Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Cougs, daily podcast about your Houston Cougars. I'm your host, Houston-born teacher and coach Parker Ainsworth, here to break down all things Cougs. If you're a U of H fan or just a hater who can't stop by, please be sure to subscribe down below. That we get the latest on the Cougs in your newsfeed each and every day. We appreciate you making Locked On Cougs your first listen of the day. If you found us on YouTube, welcome back to the YouTube channel. It's so good to see you again. Remember to subscribe. We're doing a giveaway every 250. The next one of those is 1750. So hit subscribe. Help us get there. We're just over 1700. Like and comment the video to let us know you are in that contest, whatever we decide to end up giving away. Now, if you don't know what to talk about, I'm talking about Houston and Central Florida this weekend. It's Thanksgiving week. Tell us, first of all, I guess, what is your favorite Thanksgiving side dish? Side dish, not the main side dish. I'd argue side dishes are probably the more important part anyway. I digress. All right, today's episode, we're going to talk a lot about the Central Florida game this weekend, and we're talking about a lot of stuff kind of happening off the field in this one, mostly because a discussion got sparked again, on social media over the last 3 or 4 days, and it made me decide that we need to rehash this one and re-explain why this rivalry game is a fun one, but also for a naming rights that Houston ought to have. Now, we're going to talk first about this new rivalry Houston could potentially have with Central Florida, what the things going into that are. Second, argue whether or not Central Florida is a worthy rival. Are they worthy of being called one? And last but not least, talk about the potential for bowling tied to this one. I'll let you guess what kind by the time we get there. Now, in the first segment, let's jump on in and talk about why Central Florida and this rivalry thing is happening. For one, I think it should be pointed out that I think the Big 12 kind of wants this. They scheduled Houston to play Central Florida in the final week of the season, not Texas Tech, not Baylor, not TCU, not Texas Austin, in the 1 year that we could play them. They scheduled Houston to play Central Florida in the final week of the season. The same week you see a lot of rivalry games happen. In Mississippi, you got Ole Miss and Mississippi State. You got Oregon, Oregon State, Penn State, Michigan State, Ohio State, Michigan, Kentucky, Louisville, Alabama, Auburn, Arizona, Arizona State, Vanderbilt, Tennessee, Washington, Washington State, Florida, Florida State. All of these rivalry games. I want to say Georgia pulled Georgia Tech in that one. How'd they get in that? Anyway, a lot of rivalry games happening within states. Worth noting, Kansas State plays Iowa State in the rivalry game they said they had to have every year, and are frustrated that they don't have every year. That happens this week as well. That is to say, I think that the Big 12 may be scheduling this one on purpose, and it makes some sense because Houston's coming in at the same time as Central Florida from the American Athletic Conference, both coming in with the same kind of background. We'll get more than that in a second. Central Florida does lead this all-time series 7-3, just 7-3 because they technically were in different divisions of the AAC for a while. All-time win percentage, Houston does have about the same kind of program as Central Florida. Both are hovering just around, just over, just under 55%. Very comparable football programs. So if you're trying to build that rivalry, that makes sense. Central Florida's big claim to fame is they think that they won the national title in 2017. They went 13-0 and won the Peach Bowl. You remember that just 2 years prior, Houston went 13-1 and won the Peach Bowl. And so you can see that there was a comparable situation for the two teams. Both had 13 wins and the Peach Bowl win in the mid-teens most recently. Houston does have a Heisman winner, and Andre Ware. Central Florida does not have that, but they have had 3 finalists, Dante Culpepper, Kevin Smith, and that 2017 team had Mackenzie Milton. Neither team's ever officially been AP number 1, but I think the real crux of this rivalry lands into the culture of the cities they occupy. Houston is obviously in Houston, and Central Florida is located in Orlando. Both schools designate themselves as space, or both cities, I should say, tie themselves to Space City. Houston representing the city of Houston, therefore will be tied to that because it represents everything that is Houston. And recently, Central Florida decided to call themselves Space U. So much so that they came with a light blue uniform to wear against Oklahoma State in the route of Oklahoma State that they had the other day. in doing that, I have to say, if you're wearing a light blue uniform, apparently you got to make sure that the Tennessee Titans do not see you and threaten to sue you. But what I will say also is that UCF feels like, because of their tie as a university to the nearby launch pad directly off the coast nearest Orlando, about 45 minutes or an hour away from Orlando. And there's some tie between the school, and a lot of people in the school have worked there or something like that, that they are tied to Space City and Space U, whereas Houston, being the large public institution in the city where Johnson Space Center is, inhabiting, that's a big thing for us as well. NASA in Houston is a big deal, one of the largest employers in the area for a long time, right? And so both schools tie themselves up in that training, research, flight control, all of that happens in Houston. Orlando is where they take off from, and that's it, right? So I guess what I'm getting at here is that this rivalry could very easily become called the space race, because between two fairly similar programs that are sitting here now, moving into the Big 12, moving into power football, and the space race theme would be a fun excuse for new uniforms. I mean, you saw the light blue. Once again, don't let the Tennessee Titans see them. From pause, actually. Central Florida wore light blue uniforms. Light blue in space? Have you checked out space? Light blue? That's what Earth looks like, kind of, in certain parts from a long way away. That's not what space looks like. It's dark and void, and that's the scary part. Anyway, so I said to say that, like, this is a game that could potentially have some fun uniform things with Nike. I mean, we could get into the Florida versus Texas aspect of this as well. They're across the Gulf of Mexico, but actually, like, as the bird flies, they're not as far apart as other schools in the Big 12 are by any stretch, right? All kinds of fun things there. I thought it was interesting in looking at Central Florida football history. Their school was founded in 1963. For what it's worth, there already been people in space. They haven't been to the moon yet, but there have been people in space. But, and so founded in 63, started football in 79. Houston was somewhat of an independent, I mean, almost entirely, I guess I should say, an independent football school until 1976 when they joined the Southwest Conference. And so that's weirdly similar timing as far as, like, starting that. Central Florida football historically is actually only, it was the first program, and I think it's only one of two at this point, thanks James Madison, to have played in FBS, FCS, Division II, and Division III football at various points of its history. Now, Central Florida has moved up, right? Started Division III, then Division II, then FCS, and now FBS, right? So they've grown very quickly, I guess you could argue. But frankly, I also look at, like, Houston having grown very rapidly between 76 and the mid 90s when the Southwest Conference fell apart, right? And then having to rebuild themselves in the last 30 years is kind of comparable histories and stories. And that's how these two programs relate to a rivalry. To me, I'm into it. If you have an out-of-state rivalry for Houston, I'd rather have this as an out-of-state rivalry than a lot of other big. I want to keep Tech. I want to keep Baylor. I want to keep TCU. I get those. I'm not saying to not play the in-state ones. But for an out-of-state rivalry, I'm kind of digging it. Now, Big 12 rebuilt their team conference in a lot of ways this year by pulling in newcomers like Houston and Central Florida. And if you are having to rebuild a team of your own, or if you're just flat looking to improve the team that you've got, you go to linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Do it, because these days, every new potential hire can feel like a high stakes wager for your small business. You want to be 100% certain you have access to the best qualified candidates available. And that's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs is to find the right people for your team faster and for free. Now, I wouldn't recommend hiring people that are rivals of one another, like I think Houston and Central Florida can be. But if you can get some good programs like the University of Houston, a hotbed for recruiting, and pull in key players like that to your team, you got to do it. You got to do it at LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs, you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. At linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. All right, now, is Central Florida a worthy rival, or is it just this fun, gimmicky thing Ainsworth likes? And so we're going to talk about it because Ainsworth wants to talk about it. It's a gimmicky thing. I think it is. And I say that because as far as the Big 12 is concerned, Central Florida and Houston are sitting smack dab in the middle of recruiting hotbeds. Houston, obviously in Houston, the greater Houston area, produces a lot of NFL talent year in, year out, a lot of 5-stars and 4-star kids year in, year out. And frankly, the overwhelming thought ever since Switzer settled, I mean, people outside of Houston said this, I guess I should say when I say Switzer said a long time ago, is that if Houston can just keep the best kids from Houston in Houston, that is a power program waiting to be built. We've said that on the show before. We've talked to recruiting experts, a number of them, several of them before, right? Keeping the best kids in Houston at U of H is the way to build a top flight program very quickly. And frankly, while we have our problems, the fact that there are only 8 kids in the 2024 class, a high school class for Houston right now, it does fit the billing on some of those when you look at Shadow Creek and North Shore and stuff like that coming in, right? Like they did a decent job on those things. I like the 8 kids we got. I just want more. Put that on the side. Houston, great recruiting hotbed. Orlando is a large metropolitan area in the northern, they say central Florida, but if you look at a Florida map, Orlando sits north of a lot of the civilization stuff. So you have Tampa and Miami and stuff like that. It sits east of, if you look at like Tampa and Gainesville is somewhere just north of there, right? It's central if you include like the far north part of it feels more like Georgia. But in terms of recruiting, that far north part of it, Jacksonville, Tallahassee, that you're in Georgia SEC country up there, right? Orlando itself is kind of at the epicenter of like all of these surrounding smaller areas. It's like an equidistant from Miami and Tampa and things like that. And so it pulls in a big, wide swath of area around it. I say to say that Florida and Texas as two of the 3 or 4 states with I obviously put my preferences in Texas, 2 of the 3 or 4 states that would have the top recruiting classes in any given year. You have these cities, metropolitan areas in the middle of key recruiting hotbeds that you can pull in and ultimately have like the Texas high school kids versus the Florida high school kids in a cool matchup in that instance. I think that that's an important aspect of this rivalry because you can create we don't ever lose those Texas kids. We don't ever lose the Florida kids back and forth kind of thing and make it a pride thing in your rivalry, right? So you have your in-state rivals with TCU, Tech, and Baylor, but then you have this like, yeah, but we don't ever lose to those sons of guns over there, right? Kind of like there's not a shared land border like there is with Texas and Oklahoma, but kind of like that thing they have UT Austin and OU, right? Like that kind of a combination. Although OU always gets their kids from Dallas, but I digress. Other thing I think is interesting about these two programs that makes them worthy rivals is they tend to be, frankly, in very similar positions from a coaching perspective. You have Tom Herman and Scott Frost both had a couple of successful years at these programs. Tom Herman at Houston, Scott Frost Central Florida. They then go from those couple years of success at those programs onto blue blood programs. Herman went to UT Austin. Scott Frost went to Nebraska. Those blue bloods didn't go as advertised. Boom, fired. Right. I think they both actually got like 4 years. Am I right there? They both got not a whole lot of time, and it clearly didn't work out for them. Right. Similarly, Houston had Kevin Sumlin. He went to A&M. Didn't have a whole lot of success. Had like a little bit longer run than Herman did at Texas, but I think if I'm counting things right, I'm a history teacher and a math teacher. But he goes on A&M. Things go okay, but not great. He gets fired. Right. Josh Heupel, right, had the success at Central Florida, not unlike Sumlin here. Goes to Tennessee, and people are like, okay, is this really now a couple years into this? Is this really the guy for Tennessee? Right, like they're having those kind of conversations already. Both Sumlin, Heupel, much like Herman, Frost, leave for greener pastures. Right, Art Browse would be another example of that at Houston as well. Right, guys that use this smaller program when they were a smaller program to leapfrog to big time power programs, and something happens, right? Bryles obviously was all the off the field things, kind of disgusting off the field things, frankly, not kind of very disgusting off the field things, but that ultimately leads to something not going quite right. Now that they're in the Power Five, in the discussion at the table, right? The hope for both programs is that you don't have that happening with your coaching staff. Both programs also enter the Power Five Houston with Dana Holgorsen, a guy who's been in the literal Big 12 before as far as being the Power 5 goes. Central Florida feels fairly similar to the fact that they have Gus Malzahn, who's been in the SEC before as the head coach at Auburn, right? And he was the OC for the Cam Newton Auburn team, right? They feel like, much like the pitch for Dana Holgorsen and Houston joining the Big 12 as well, is like we've got a coach that has done Power 5 ball before. Both guys are fallible. Both guys have had things they've done wrong. There's a reason both guys did not stick Holgorsen, I guess, technically somewhat by his choice at those power programs before, right? Now we're entering the Power 5 program with these two guys, and I think that that's something, frankly, that was a signal to big Power 5 conferences. Like, oh, these schools are, interested in being a part of the big time, and they hire and pay coaches like a Dana or a Malzahn. Regardless of what you want to say about them, right? That's theoretically, I think, the signal. I also think, as far as looking like a worthy rivalry, I go back to this idea that like we were both successful in that mid-teens area, and we're both looking to kind of rebuild and get back to that success that feels kind of like almost lightning in a bottle. The Tom Herman era, right? 13-1, the Peach Bowl, the undefeated season, Central Florida. It feels like, how quickly can we get back to that? That's in the, I don't want to say the back of every fan's mind of both schools, but both schools see that as like recent success. Like, oh, we can do that. Like we can get that thing back. We can bottle it up. We can build on that. We have the resources coming in very soon. Like, we should be able to get back to that. And I think that both are valid. I would think that Houston's got some more tools in its back pocket, right? As far as like, I like the way it's located with Houston in various ways as opposed to Orlando. But that's just, I mean, when we talk to Orlando people, I guess we have that separate show. I look at all this to say that I would consider Central Florida a very worthy out-of-state rival. I say out-of-state because I don't want to trump the ones that are in-state. Obviously, I think Tech as the in-state public institution, Baylor as the closest conference school, or TCU, you can get some DFW and Houston vibes going with that one. I think there are reasons to have the in-state rivals as well, and I would make a very solid pitch for any of them. Is the idea that you can get an out-of-state rival with this one. I think that's potentially really, really important. In this year's instance, Houston enters at 4-7. I think I'm counting that right. 4-7, and Central Florida enters at 5-6. And theoretically, the winner is bowl eligible. I mean, Central Florida is for sure bowl eligible. That is to say that they should be able to enter bowl at 6-6 if they win this game on Friday. Houston can play on Saturday. If they win this, Houston can play spoiler and win this game and keep them at 5-7. And then Houston themselves would be 5-7. I want to talk some about how that's potentially still bowling in the final segment. But first, that would involve winning. So let's talk about how you can be winning, and that's winning at Prize Picks. And go to prizepicks.com/locked-on-college. Now, Prize Picks is a place where you can win playing daily fantasy sports games each and every day. It's the most unique and fun to play and the largest daily fantasy sports platform out there. Prize Picks has all kinds of cool combinations at this cool equinox of sports. You play football and basketball at the same time, where you can combine stats across different athletes in different sports. You can say like Travis Kelce's going to and LeBron James combined for more than 10.5 catches and 3-pointers made. Sneaky good bet there alert, because LeBron James making a lot of threes this year. I digress. You put over 10.5. I think that the over, then Kelce has 7 catches. LeBron has 4 threes. Boom, you're over. You can combine all your different viewing habits and all the things you know about all the different sports in one place. They also have a cool reboot policy. That way, your guys stay in play even if someone gets injured. So like in a football or basketball game, if someone gets hurt in the first half, does not come back in the second, that player is rebooted, and then suddenly you don't have to lose any money on those picks. Prize Picks is the only daily fantasy sport platform with that type of injury insurance. Go win today. Go to prizepicks.com/locked-on-college and use code LOCKEDONCollege for first deposit match up to $100. That's code LOCKED ONCOLLEGE. You put in $100, they'll put $100 right back on top of it. PrizePicks.com. Go win today. All right, now, last segment here will not be a long one. I don't mean to drown this out, but I have stressed how important it would be for Houston to be in a bowl game this year. I cannot stop stressing that enough. It appears there's not going to be a change at head coach. They might change some other coaching spots. Dana said, he didn't say anyone by name, but he mentioned coaches that were not doing the job with substitutions in his press conference availability again on Monday. Going to a bowl game would be a chance for, if you want to pull in someone new and get some work in, kind of, jumpstart the spring for the guys that are getting to stay. It'd be a chance to work together. It frankly would be another month of practice for a lot of the young guys, because Houston's depth this year got crazy young, crazy fast. For guys like Donovan Smith, their first year, so many transfers came into Houston last year. Their first year in a new system would get to continue to work and practice for another month. Being a bowl game would have been really, really nice. And I feel like by most standards, most conventional standards for sure, losing to Oklahoma State ultimately put a nail in that coffin. You would think that being the seventh loss means Houston could not have 6 regular season wins. They're going to have a losing record. But 5 and 7 teams have made bowl appearances in rare occasions. And it looks like this year we are heading towards one of those occasions. Simply put, there are almost definitely not going to be enough 6-win teams to fill all the bowl slots. And these sponsors have their bowl slots. So the Cheez-It Bowl, Cheez-Its are paying for a bowl game with a bunch of advertising money that's going to have 2 football teams in it. Right? Cheez-Its being my example. I don't actually know if Houston will be eligible for the Cheez-It Bowl or not. I hadn't checked bowl affiliations and those kinds of things. But I enjoy Cheez-Its, so that was my segue there. If there are not enough 6-win teams, the NCAA goes to first the academic progress rate, in which they look at scholarly rankings of schools that are 5 and 7 and reward schools that had a good academic semester at 5 and 7. Those typically are how you see like a Cal or a Stanford sneak in that way and add the Pac-10, I guess not the Pac-12, about the Pac-2 number. You'll see a Big Ten school get that, Northwestern, something like that, sometimes too at 5 and 7. But even if they run out of those spots, first of all, I guess it would depend on where Houston fits into a ranking of the 5 and 7 schools, because the school has to be 5 and 7 at that point. Even if those didn't land on Houston, there is still a chance where then conferences can say, hey, we have to, as a conference, because of our affiliation, send a school to that bowl game. We're going to nominate Houston. The bowl game accepts, they could go, right? That is crazy, outside the box, not very, very likely. But winning against Central Florida would get you to 5 wins, and thus becomes imperative to even have that sliver of a chance at a bowl game. And I don't necessarily care about exactly which 14-word sponsored bowl game Houston ends up on, playing on December 26th at 9 a.m. in Timbuktu. That's not the game itself is not necessarily the point to me. The point is giving yourself a reason to continue your season. And if this is really a development year, having another month to develop, guys, is really, really, really important. And if there's an outside chance that you can go do that, on top of spoiling UCF's shot at a 6-6 season, outside of needing to be a team that beat someone else from the newbies, so that we didn't lose to Cincinnati and feel like you're the lowest of the newbies or whatever. On top of all of that, for the future of the program, not just the present, winning this game and having the shot, the outside sliver of a bowl game, is really, really important. People are going to call me desperate. Bring it on. I've been called a lot worse, right? I think it's really, really important for this program. If you think differently, if you think spoiling a potential rivalry in the Space U space race is not worth it. If you think other things, if you think, frankly, you're throwing in the towel and you want to go to basketball and you want to say screw off Parker, tell me in the comments down below. Feel free to type all of that up. Thank you all so much for listening to Locked On Cougs today. Locked On Big 12 is breaking all kinds of things down. Go down there. Locked On Big 12, doing all kinds of fun things across the conference. Locked On Cougs is a prime Locked On Podcast Network. That means your team, our Cougs, every day. Go Cougs.